Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch, our show following everything happening with the latest gaming hardware. I'm Daemon Hatfield. This week I'm joined by Max Scoville, host of IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond.
Hey.
And once again, we're joined by Jada Griffin, our head of community here at IGN. Welcome back.
Hey, back-to-back episodes. Love it.
Back to back. And we've got a true Next Gen Console Watch this week. We're talking about the Next Gen consoles. Xbox has come right and said they are working full speed ahead on the next generation Xbox. And Xbox President Sarah Bond said they are focused on delivering the biggest technological leap ever in a generation, which is a little amusing considering I don't think people would probably say that about this current generation that we're in. I think there seems to be general sentiment that the current gen consoles haven't reached their full potential yet and maybe have been a little bit held back by how many developers still have one leg in the previous generation, still releasing their games cross-gen also for PS4 and Xbox One. So Max, let's begin with you. What's your sort of overall sentiment about the strength of this current generation?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I kind of keep waiting for them to do their thing. And again, we get a lot of great games that are cross-platform or not necessarily pushing the envelope super hard. But for Xbox to come out and be like, we're going full speed ahead on next gen, we're going to make the most powerful thing ever. And I kind of feel like they, this gen, the Series S, if anything, is, I feel like, kind of holding things back a little bit. But obviously, they've also got tons of support still for PS4 and Xbox One games. And yeah, I would love to see this hardware really pushed to its fullest. It just seems like a weird thing to publicly announce when, if you're trying to sell any of the Series X or S in the next 4 years or however long it's going to be until we get a new generation.
Jada, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon for this far into a console generation to still have developers developing for the previous generation, but I feel, and this is anecdotal, I haven't looked at dates and specific number of titles, but I feel like by this point in the PS4 and Xbox One series lifespan, that they were kind of starting to move away from developing previous generation. And so like it's interesting to hear that they're going full speed ahead and it's gonna be a big launch, and I'm like, yeah, I hope it is gonna be a big leap from the previous generation, because we're still kind of getting mostly PS4 stuff. And Xbox One stuff. Like, granted, Xbox is really great with its smart delivery and upgrading things for whether you're playing it on the S or the X, but it still feels like we're getting some of that more older stuff.
Yeah, and remember, in the run-up to the release of both of these current-gen consoles, Xbox was getting a lot of attention for its commitment to backwards compatibility. Remember, Jim Ryan said that there at Sony, they believe in generations. Jim Ryan said to GamesIndustry.biz in May of 2020, "We have always said we believe in generations. We believe that when you go to all the trouble of creating a next-gen console, that it should include features and benefits that the previous generation does not include, and that, in our view, people should make games that make the most of these features. We do believe in generations, and whether it's the DualSense controller, whether it's the 3D audio, whether it's the multiple ways that the SSD can be used, we are thinking that it is time to give the PlayStation community something new, something different that can really only be enjoyed on PS5. But 4 years later, I'm not sure that that's how I would describe the PS5. Max, how about you?
Potential, but those are games that are specifically only using the PS5, and that's they're paid for by the PS5. They're designed to showcase what that thing can do. And the fact that we're not getting any games from Sony's first party studios this year that really are, testing those limits and pushing those boundaries. And the fact that, Sony's putting stuff on PC, which is awesome. I think that's great for games as a whole, but as far as sort of justifying, spending $500 4 years ago, I don't know. Like I'm not super blown away. I was really expecting, I was expecting a lot of stuff to be running at a high frame rate and a high resolution at the same time. A lot of the time it's sort of an either or situation. I was really hoping that load times would be something of a thing of the past. Even if it meant sacrificing frame rate and resolution. But I feel like we're getting sort of none of the above here. And a lot of things are still kind of chugging along. It's very incremental. It's a very, little steps. I randomly put on a video sort of comparing exactly what the PS5 version of GTA 5 did in comparison with the PS4 version, which was itself already kind of a next gen upgrade. And it's hilarious. Like, someone dug into it in the comments and they were just, it's literally it is literally smoke and mirrors. Like the smoke and the explosions and the reflection in mirrors is the stuff that's most impressive because it's these really tiny granular things. That said, the time it takes to load the single player thing up just from the get-go is about twice as fast. But, you know, that's the kind of thing I would love to see that across the board. Like I think I haven't tried, you know, loading up something like Elden Ring on a last gen system, but yeah, I mean, there's still a sizable load time getting that up and running on current gen, as in, you know, Series X and PS5. I don't know. Maybe I had expectations that were too high. Maybe the technology is there for developers to take advantage of. They just haven't quite zeroed in on how to fully optimize that. I'm sure by the tail end of this console generation, we're going to be seeing some really amazing stuff, especially with developers, you know, fully implementing everything that Unreal 5 can do. Because from the sound of it, that does a lot of heavy lifting in the making pretty stuff easier to do department. But right now, it's just, yeah, I don't know. It feels sort of like really just a slight bump over last gen. Yeah.
What about these specific examples that Jim Ryan provided of what PS5 was going to provide that PS4 couldn't? The DualSense controller, 3D audio, and the multiple ways that the SSD can be used. Jada, do you feel like we've actually seen those promises realized?
I think we've seen it in some fringe cases, Returnal being the big one for me. The 3D audio on that game is fantastic. You playing it with the DualSense, the fact that every gun has a different feel, a different kind of vibration to it. You know, Housemarque came out the gate and just killed it with that title. And we know they're working on something new and different, so hopefully they're gonna use more of these features in their next game. Ratchet and Clank, as Max pointed out, was another big one that also used a lot of these features. So again, it's one of those things where a lot of the Sony paid studios are using these things, but it's not something that is implemented as evenly across the board when it comes to, say, like third-party games. Like, yes, we'll get to hear footsteps and voices and other cool little like things out of the speaker and the controller, as well as the different pulses and such we get from the DualSense, but they're not. I wouldn't say they're like fully implemented to immersion levels. And really that's what I got from this quote, is that with the DualSense controller and the 3D audio, they're really trying to find ways to make the games more immersive for players out there. And I don't think that a lot of developers are spending as much time as they could on that, but also they may not be seeing the dividends paying back on investing a bunch of time on a controller, especially if it's a multi-party game that's going to PlayStation and Xbox. That's a lot of time to develop one feature for one section of your audience.
Mm-hmm. The controller in particular, like, I think the DualSense haptics are interesting. I think it's a cool idea, but it's also, I know plenty of people who just flat out turn that stuff off.
Sure.
The fact that as far as immersion goes, the fact that if your controller is like whistling and beeping at you and vibrating at weird intervals, and it takes more effort to pull the triggers down, that doesn't immerse you. That takes you out of it and reminds you that you're holding a controller. And that's, I can see that being frustrating. On the other hand, the 3D audio stuff, I've heard it working on my friend's very nice, Sony branded surround sound system hooked up to his Sony TV, and it's all this wonderful ecosystem, and it's all calibrated perfectly. Like, he's an audio guy, he gets it, he knows what he's doing, and it's great when you have it in that exact, perfect setup. But if you're not the kind of person who knows how to properly calibrate that, if you don't have the right kind of a sound system to support it, it's just going to sound normal. It's not doing anything, it's not doing anything magical as far as I can tell. This isn't. Maybe I'm just not hearing things that other people are, but the 3D audio, it sounds cool in sort of, as a buzzword on the box, but in practice, it's not like the same deal as, glasses-free 3D on the 3DS or something like that. It still depends on what your speaker setup is like for that. And again, you can have the best TV in the world, but if you've got that real motion thing turned on, it's still going to look like crap. And, you can have a PS5 that outputs wonderful 3D audio, but if you don't have a good surround sound system or good headphones, you're probably not going to take advantage of that.
The other couple features that were touted to be, really revolutionary for this generation were 4K resolution and 60 frames per second. I mean, the PlayStation 5 box even has 8K right there on the box, which is amusing. I think there are a lot of games that can do 4K or 60 frames per second on PS5. Maybe only a couple that does both at the same time. What do you think? Can they actually get there? We expect mid-gen refreshes from both consoles, the PS5 Pro and the Xbox Brooklyn, whatever that is. Do you think we can get to 4K and 60 frames per second simultaneously by the next generation?
By the next generation, I think so. I think it also goes to the point of once we get into Unreal 5, and that takes away some of the time that it cuts down on the time the developers need to spend on certain things. It'll allow them to help with optimizing to ensure these games run at 4K 60 FPS, and not only just hitting 4K 60 FPS, but running a stable 4K 60 FPS. We see a lot of games that say, oh yeah, we're hitting 60 frames, but you know, things get crazy in certain games. You have a lot of things going on the screen, and it dips down to 40, 44. And so, like, I'm hoping by the time we get to next generation, yes, that will be a stable thing. I will say, for me, I'm not too much of a frame rate snob. Yes, I like my games in 60 FPS, but it's not a deal breaker. As long as the game is optimized well to handle when it dips. And it doesn't feel like the game is just chugging and struggling to keep up because of the hardware.
Yeah, I'm not too much of a stickler for frame rate either. And, you know, to be fair, there have been a lot of really amazing games released this generation. I think it's just, I and a lot of other people have just been a little bit surprised at how long the developers have wanted to keep supporting the previous generation. In fact, we have a quote from Rod Ferguson of Blizzard just today. He's the head of Diablo. And he says, there's always a time and a place for when maybe it's time to no longer support a platform. I don't think we're at that time. Of course, Diablo 4 out last year is on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. He said, we have a long road for Diablo 4. We talk about, hey, we have this idea for a feature, but maybe it's not a feature our min-spec or Gen 8 players can support, so it's not something we can do today. And I mean, that's it right there. He's just saying, we have an idea for our game, but we can't do it because we can't manage it on the PS4 and Xbox One. That sounds like, at least to some extent, the current generation is being held back, at least a little bit. Hopefully, I don't know. I want to believe that Cerebon's statement that the next generation will feature the biggest technological leap ever seen in a generation. That sounds great to me.
I mean,
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Please go ahead.
I was gonna say we've seen you know, developers talk about these types of features, and we saw it you know, where we'll get updated versions. Take like Final Fantasy VII Remake, where Intergrade was exclusive to the PS5, whereas, you know, Remake was on both PS4 and PS5. So I wouldn't count out Blizzard for potentially levying an expansion in the future to potentially implement this new feature, but only time will tell.
Okay, last week we were talking about games they're announced, they're coming, we're looking forward to them, but we don't expect them to arrive this generation. These are next-gen games. And we asked, which one of these do you think that we will be out first? Of the games we were discussing, which do you think we'll actually be playing first? And Naughty Dog's next game came in first place with almost half of all the votes, which I'm a little surprised, beating out The Witcher 4, Elder Scrolls 6, Cyberpunk 2, and Fizzant, just given the fact that the new Naughty Dog game hasn't even been announced yet. I don't know, Max, is that surprising to you?
That's very funny. I guess the bird in the bush and two in the hand, or whatever the expression is. Like, it's such a funny, like, I could see them coming out of left field and being like, hey, surprise, here's the thing, it's out soon. I love it when that happens, when we have the sort of short turnaround between reveal and delivery. And I know that a lot of time when games get advanced really far in advance, it's not so much for fans or prospective buyers as it is to try to rustle up some developers and you know, generate some interest in the project, and, you know, maybe get some shareholders excited. But yeah, like, I don't know, the fact Witcher 4, I feel like maybe we'll see that sooner than still later, but maybe sooner than other things on that list.
Well, here's a poll for you to vote on for next episode. What did you expect from this console generation that PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X didn't deliver on? Was it that 60 frames per second, locked, zero load times, true current-gen games, 8K visuals, or even first-party exclusives? Make sure to vote at IGN.com the day this episode goes live. We'll share the results with you next episode. And that's going to do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch. Thank you to both Max and Jada. Thank you to Jobert and Marian working behind the scenes to make this episode possible. My name is Daemon. We'll be back next week with more on the latest video game hardware. We'll see you then.